What is going on, traders? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Kyle Williams, and let's jump right in. So what on earth are we gonna be talking about today in this video? I wanted to actually dive back into history, go back in the past, and talk about the first couple of years of my trading, specifically how I handled trading through college, right? That's a very common question I get from a lot of people who are trying to learn and get used to trading while in their early years of life. Call it, 18 through 22, 23, 24, 25. I'm now 27 years old. I've been trading over 7+ years. However, there was a period of time when I was a little youngster, if you want to call it. Again, I'm still very young, but there was a time when I was 20 years old and I stumbled upon the stock market. There was a time when I still lived with my parents and I went to college and I had a part-time job, and it's like all those things going on. How did I go about that? How did I go about handling it, juggling everything in my life? And ultimately, then before I even graduated college, making over $200,000. And so this video, it not only is for if you are in college, but even if you're at a full-time job, right? How do you juggle and learn from traders who have juggled to being profitable, to get to being successful in trading? So let's just jump right in. So I had found trading in mid 2016, mid to early. I was about a sophomore in college. I was an engineering major. I knew that's not what I wanted to do. And so I did all these other tinkering and trying to find other, I did personality tests. I tried to find all these other things that would get me to ultimately find and led me to trading. But once I found trading, how did I then structure my life, right? I was a full-time student. I had a part-time job. What ended up happening was I wanted to put as much time and effort into trading as possible. I kind of knew when I found trading that this was going to be it. I wanted to make a career out of this. I immediately switched my major from engineering to finance, thinking that was going to help it. And looking in hindsight, it really didn't. But nonetheless, finance was a much easier major for me to accomplish than engineering was. For those all you engineers out there, you know what I'm talking about. Very difficult. And so in my sophomore year, I switched it, made a complete switch, and then pretty much let college go on the back burner. I pretty much became a B to A student, and I immediately turned into a C to B student. Like, D's get degrees almost became my motto. Sorry college, but I did that because it gave me more time to then study trading. Pretty much, I just did the bare minimum. I got the homework done. I studied just enough for the tests to be able to pass, and that was pretty much that. And now, how did my actual schedule work? Well, I live on the West Coast, and this was a huge benefit for me. And this is unfortunately going to be a tougher thing for those who are on the East Coast, whether you are in college or have a full-time job. It's tougher because you have to go into work or to your classes by 8, 9, 10 a.m. and the market opens at 9:30 Eastern. So how are you going to juggle that? For me, the market opened at 6:30 Eastern. Okay, so I was actually able to trade. And if I had to go to a class, if I had to pick a class that was midday, I wouldn't go to 10, 11 o'clock in the morning. Okay, so I had a few hours to actually trade. But most semesters, I actually ended up pushing all my classes later in the day. Because again, the market opened for 6:30 a.m. for me Pacific time, and then it closed 1 p.m. Pacific time. So I was actually able a lot of the times not to have my first classes of the day until 2 o'clock, right? So I would have classes from 2 to 7, 2 to 9 some nights, and then have all morning long to trade and study and prepare and do whatever I needed to do stock market wise to get that done. Now, again, there were times where I had to pick classes during the day, but like I said, I would pick them midday during the stock market, right? If you know how trading works or you've heard this before, some of the most busiest times in the stock market is to trade the first hour of the day and the last hour of the day. And so if I had to pick a class, I would usually pick a class in midday. And for me, that was that 9, 10, 11 a.m. area. And so on top of that, along with being between those later night classes, again, between 2 and 9 p.m. Pacific time, I would do as much homework as I could between classes. I would try to do homework during class, right? I would do my best to study at the same time as well, but I would try to fit in all of my non-trading things in non-trading hours, if that makes sense. On top of that, I was a part-time server at a restaurant, and I used to work pretty much any day of the week at nighttime. Once I found trading, I moved all of my shifts to Friday, Saturday, and Sunday night. Why? Because again, that was usually the shift that made me the most money anyway as a server. But on top of that, that was the nights that I didn't have to, and besides Sunday night, I didn't have to necessarily prepare or study as much for the stock market. Once Friday ends, trading wise, it's the weekend. And so that's when I would do all of my hours that I had to work to have some kind of job throughout college. On top of that, I also would do homework. Again, like I said, non-trading and market hours was a lot of the time where I did non-trading related things. But again, I tried to do my best as possible that when the market was open, that was the time to do it. And again, if I couldn't do it, I would really make sure to do it for the first hour and the last hour. So that's how I really juggled it. And again, it was quite a busy time in terms of oh, Kyle, do you have a social life? Not as much. Yeah, I had friends. Yeah, I stayed in touch. Yeah, I got to see them every now and then. But for a very long time for me, all the way, I would say from 2016 all the way up until at least 2018, 2019, it was full on. Actually, I guess technically from 2016 all the way until mid 2019 when I finally quit my part-time job, I saw my friends way less than I went to class in college. I saw my friends way less than I worked at a part-time job as a server. I saw my friends significantly way less than how much I actually studied and tried to trade in the stock market. So that's was the actual gist of things. And again, thankfully, and again, my own personal scenario here was that I unfortunately, I did work out a deal with my parents so I could stay home home and have to move out until I graduated college. That part-time job was able to keep me alive and buy things and pay for things that I needed to do. And again, my expenses were low. I was call it a broke college student, or as broke as I was going to be. Thankfully, unfortunately, as trading got more successful, as well as you'll see here soon, it ended up leading to success. And my goal was that, if hopefully by the time I can graduate college, I will be making enough money from trading so that I don't have to get a regular job, And I remember getting in actual fights about this with my dad, where he was like, yeah, you're trading and you're making maybe a little bit of money after, I say, about a year in. It took me about 12 months to finally make some kind of money out of this. So 2016, 2017 was just kind of trying to get myself together. But even when I started making a little bit of money, $100 there, $200 there, etc., my dad still said, hey, that's not enough money to live off of. You still need to get an internship. You still need to prepare as if you're going to graduate college and go into the workforce kind of thing. And in some ways I was determined, but also stubborn in the fact that I actually started just faking applying for internships. I started acting like, yep, I applied for a few interviews today, Dad. They're not calling me back. I don't know what to do, because I knew doing that took more time away from me studying and getting good at trading. Like, again, trading was plan A, and that was it. There was no plan B. Now, granted, is that kind of stupid? Yes. But again, I wanted to put as much time as I possibly could into plan A because I knew I was young, I can afford to. And then if I'm lagging behind and it didn't work out for whatever reason, I can just rush it up and quickly go back to plan B, if that makes sense. And so on top of just faking internships, or that I was applying and going to and trying for internships, I also took one less class a semester, right? I was doing a full-time student job of doing 5 classes a semester. I went down to 4. So it took me more than 4 years to graduate, which again, this is silly, but it gave me an extra, it had me to go through college for an extra year, hence giving me more time to try to be profitable trading, right? So I really methodically and conscientiously thought about all these things and how it would add up to the ultimate goal of being profitable. And again, like I said, by the time I had graduated college, I had made over $200,000. And I graduated during COVID, okay? So 3 years ago by now, I graduated May of 2020. I had made over $200,000. At the time, I was making over $90,000 in 2019, and I was already making $20,000 a month on average by the time I got into May of 2020. So I was right at that $200,000 mark, and I haven't had a job since. I've been trading my entire adult career, if you want to call it, and I plan to do that for the rest of my career, given that I continue to do as well as I've done, which again, now plus 7+ years later and over $4 million in trading profits. So this early roots really has helped me get to where I am today. So that's that. Now, in terms of like, okay, Kyle, that's great. You got your scheduling down, but how on earth did you actually make your money? What kind of setups did you have? What kind of trades did I take? And so I actually went, again, this is, call it 4 years ago. I went back to some of the archives. For some of you guys who know how well I track trades, I love taking pictures of practically every single trade I've ever taken. And so let's jump right in. Let's look at some of the earliest trades I've taken that unfortunately I did pull out all main profits just to show like what setups were working and are still working to this day. But don't get me wrong, there has absolutely been losses along the way. There are plenty of these setups that we're gonna go over that typically don't work. But again, like any good trader, any good strategy, there is risk management involved. But again, that's a whole other topic beyond this video. But let's just jump into some of the trades that actually worked, that actually contributed to this first 200K in profits before I graduated college, okay? So for those who know my strategy or who've watched it really, even those who don't know, my first main and really 4 strategies I had that got to this 200K mark was 1, I love to panic dip buy stocks. 2, I love to buy stocks that were kind of holding their highs, ideally close to breakout levels, usually in a hot sector. So there was kind of like buying momentum in a way. It wasn't always a breakout and it wasn't always a momentous sector. But again, more indicators of that kind of led me to finding where these good buys became. And usually they were in hot sectors, as you'll see. So there was that. Thirdly, I also started shorting stocks in general, like shorting first red days. And overextended stocks, I'd short them on their first time they go red, which again, I found that because a lot of the panic dip buys I was buying were some of those overextended stocks. So I kind of found they would go hand in hand, that panic dip buy and that short on the first red day. On top of that, I love to trade small cap stocks. I love to trade penny stocks. And for those who have any experience whatsoever in that realm, that's where a lot of scammy pump and dump stocks are. And so I actually started getting good at shorting some of these pump and dumps. So let me just dive right into some of these old trades that I went through, and some of the most memorable. I remember them as if like they were yesterday. The first one here is CANN. And so for CNN, for those who know, this was a weed stock throughout 2017 and 2018, and even believe a little bit of 2019. Weed stocks were hot numerous times throughout the year. And again, for those who, another lesson of learning, for those who want to learn how to capture kind of profits in the stock market, catching wind of some kind of hot sector can usually be pretty profitable. And for me, and a lot of times, it was the weed market. And so CAN was one of them. This one was one of those momentum buys where there was tons of breakouts in the run-up of CAN, and there was other ones like Buds and Nugs and CBDS, I believe was one. Maybe I'm getting that ticker wrong, but there was dozens of them, right? Pot N, another one. But CAN was one I traded pretty frequently. And again, this was one that I was just trading off momentum. There's a stock that pretty much had been grinding all day, but again, pretty illiquid. You gotta remember, as a small trader still throughout this time, I have most of these trades are gonna be under 100K, under 200K in profit. So my account size is not that big. Hence, I can trade a lot more illiquid stocks. Now being 7 years later, my trading strategy is still very similar, but how I trade and what I trade is different. And part of that is liquidity, volume. Nowadays, I probably would not even trade this ticker because it's still too low in volume. But again, back then I could. Back then, that's kind of what I knew better than not. So pretty illiquid as I look at it now, but back then had a really great morning move, held all day long, held this 160 support line. I decided to buy it thinking we're gonna at least close around this level, if not maybe over the high a day. I could buy it, we go up a few cents, we close at 172, and the next day we gap up, another morning spike all the way up to $2 and even into the 220s. I ended up selling, half my position here in like the 190s, another half of my position, I believe at $2, 300 shares on each side. I only had 600 shares, not even a $2,000 position, barely a $1,500 position, but I made $180. And this was in June 2017. And this is just one example, but I did this dozens of times. And yes, there were small losses. Yes, there were many times where I did the same kind of buy and the next morning it didn't morning spike and it actually morning panic. And so I just sold it below my stop loss. Like I would have sold it below 160 here, but it gapped up, it worked, and I made $120. Very small gain, but nonetheless a very strong stepping stone for just one of many trades that continuously grew my small account. Here is a short trade. This was not a weed sector, but a crypto sector. As you know, and like I said in my timeline, I traded through 2016 all the way to 2020 of college. And guess if you know how Bitcoin and crypto went in 2017, we had a very, very hot market. And so this is one of those trades. BTCS here followed Bitcoin in many, many ways. One of these run-ups it had from, I think, low as, I don't forget exactly where it started running, but I think it was as low as like 10 to 5 cents or so. And it went all the way up to 60 cents here or so, like 58, 59 cents. And I wasn't that good of a short seller at the time. Nowadays, when I look at this kind of chart, I would have loved to have gotten short up here and kind of caught this pullback. But again, at the time, I wasn't that good. I wasn't that experienced. I wasn't that aggressive. But what I was I loved getting in on the backside, right? As this kind of bounce topped out, I loved getting short or risking either this bounce high or even sometimes the previous bounce highs or the high a day if I was really aggressive. But I did get short right here, held it overnight. And then what do you know, the next day panicked. I kind of rode it out throughout this whole entire day. One more day and another panic. And I finally covered in the, call it 25 to 26 cent range. Again, why? Because I don't have the daily chart up for you, but this had multiple green days, right? Like I said, from 10 cents to 60 cents, like 2 or 3 or 4 green days in a row. And once we were looking for that backside move, which again, this was kind of the blow off move we saw, on top of that, getting confirmation that this was another red day, sometimes second red days follow first red days, which is why I held it overnight and covered it on the second red day down to 25 cents, pretty much took it from 40 cents down to 25 cents. I made $236, I believe, in August of 2017. So again, another $230 doesn't sound like a lot. It's like you're talking about making 20K or 200K over your college career, and we're going over a couple $100 trades. But I'm doing that because I'm showing you in 2017, I was just getting profitable. I just started to kind of get some kind of momentum. I believe in all of 2017, I made like $6,000, which doesn't sound like a lot, but the reality is that's what started allowing me to make $30,000 in 2018, and then $90,000 in 2019, and then again, $20,000 per month by the time I graduated college in 2020. So it all adds up. And so this was a really solid short trade for me at the time. Again, like I said, $236 and a great range from 40 cents all the way down to 25 cents. Again, smaller price tickers, but that was my style. And again, in many ways today is still my style. Now we're going on to some trades that I started taking in 2018. IGCC, unironically, another weed runner at the time. Ultimately, they ended up getting delisted. I think this is the delisting. It used to be IGC as a weed runner, but they ended up getting delisted to IGCC because the SEC said, hey, you're not even actually a weed company. They just said they were. So again, another little backstory to that. But again, similar idea here. And again, this is only intraday, but on the daily chart, this had been a multi-day runner. This had been overextended up over, hundreds of percent. And I topped out at 180. It started fading and kind of created this support line here at like 155-ish, almost like 160-ish. Well, 160 at the top, but at the bottom, like 155-ish. And I thought to myself, if this can't stroll strongly, again, back to that can example, like I like buying stocks that are kind of closing their highs. This is not near its highs at all. Like its highs is at 180 and it's overextended. I remember thinking to myself, if this is going to start to break down this support level and not kind of reclaim any of its higher highs or lower highs, I should say here, then this could fade. The backside could come of this. This is how extending stocks work if you're a short seller. And so I ended up getting short in this kind of consolidated period. I remember adding my last piece on this breakdown here and ultimately just covered into this weakness, covered a third into this panics, held the other 2K shares overnight. We got a gap down. I covered into like the little morning dip here. Ultimately, I ended up making $1,000. And again, this was in November, right here, November-2 or 11-2 of 2018. And now you say $1,000. What originally went from, a couple $100, $200 of a trade. Now we're talking a couple thousand, $8,000. So again, over time, as my account gets bigger, as I get more experience, I get better at the same kind of setups and picking the right spots. And ultimately it led to me bringing in more money, actually making a career of myself, kind of to prove my dad wrong, right? It turned into just a couple $100 of profit into crap. I just made $1,000 on a trade. I only have to do that once or twice a week for the entire year. And now I'm making entry-level job money, right? So that's kind of, and I was thinking about this the entire time I was going through college. Like, this is what needs to get done. This is the long-term goal. And so yeah, $1,000 here, right? Let's move on to the next one. Now, the next one here is also IGC. As I was going through my trades, I saw, this is one of the most memorable ones because again, like I said, IGCC used to be IGC. They got kind of delisted, if you want to call it, because they weren't actually a weed company. They went from IGC to IGCC. Man, I took that trade short on IGCC. Months later, this is now February 2019. Okay, so from November 2018 to February 2019, they decided to actually get their act together and say, hey, NASDAQ, we've established what kind of company we are. We know we're not weed, but we've become weed. We want to re-enlist on the NASDAQ exchange. We want to kind of not be delisted anymore. And so that was gigantic news at the time, because again, when it got delisted, it was around like $2 to $3. And at the time it was trading at like 20 or 30 cents. And so yes, legitimately, this stock literally was up from like 20 cents and it was at $1.50. So it was up hundreds of percent. And normally I would not be buying a stock up hundreds of percent, but I just had the thesis, again, a momentum kind of trading thesis of like, they delisted at $3. There's gonna be a lot of people who think that it's gonna re-enlist at $3. Hence there's this huge momentum. And again, a stock holding near its highs. So I actually got long while it was holding near its highs. It ends up breaking out in the last hour of the day, the more important times of the day. I remember selling a couple of thousand shares there, 200 shares there, held the rest overnight. It's very similar to the can example. It gapped up, it morning spiked. I sold 900 shares there out the open, and the 900 shares into 250 level. It ended up going much higher, actually well above $3. I should have stuck to that thesis of like, $3 was kind of where it was going to reopen, or where people thought it would go, because that's where it got delisted. And again, I ended up making $1,500 on this long trade. So again, the more time passes, bigger my gains get. The bigger my account gets, the more I can risk, the more I can stick to the same kind of just simple numbers game of formulas and ones and zeros, that if I have more money to risk or more money in my account, I have more money to risk. Same risk management, same setups, just more money, right? This is a very similar setup to the CANN example earlier, but just more volume, better catalyst, and ultimately ended up being a bigger move, okay? So there's that one. Next we have here is a pump and dump, right? Like I said, some of these pump and dump / scammy tickers I used to love to short sell. And again, to this day, they're not as frequent, but I still do love to short them as well. Again, this was in April of 2019. This one I wanted to bring up because this was actually a trade that I took while having to juggle college. So not in too much detail of actually how this pump and dump went down, but the highest of the point of the pump and dump was at $3. It had gapped down because it got a very negative rating from the OTC Markets website, gapped down to below $2, and just traded here for about 1 or 2 days. And I knew this was not over yet. I knew this could go back down below $1, maybe even 50 cents. And so at $2, I thought to myself, this isn't done yet. So I started getting short, which is why you see me getting short all across these different timeframes over the last 2 days. Now, this was during a semester in 2019 when I had to actually have a class during trading hours. And so I had to pick during midday. And I actually had an exam. And so this was a little bit of a risky trade. But again, I also was very convicted because pump and dumps are a very high conviction setup for me that, I'm going to stay short. I am going to go to my exam, finish my exam, and immediately come back. And so I go to my exam. I start taking it right around like here. Again, midday, right? This is 11 a.m. I take it, I think my class starts at like 11:30. So it's like right in here. I take my exam, I finish, I immediately rush out of the room. I check my phone, one of the apps I can check quotes on my phone, and I see this thing at $1. Like this panic has started while I was taking the exam. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm up money. And so I run to the library to get my laptop out, and I'm just like hurrying because I don't know why, like it was the first moment for me where I actually had a trade going on and I wasn't there to watch it, right? It was one of those things where I had to take a class midday. I finally had to give in and just pick a class during the trading hours. And so when I just rushed to my laptop and immediately covered at 50 cents because that was really, again, my original best case goal. Ended up going down as low as like 33, 34, and then closing at 35 cents. I made over $6,000 on this trade. It was like one of my biggest trades at the time. And again, this was in April 2019. This kind of trade for me was so eye-opening because again, $6,000 was such a big win for me at the time. It was like such a significant portion of how much money I was even making, not even per month, but over multiple months, if not over half the year, working as a server job part-time. And this was kind of the catalyst for me to realize like, I'm gonna quit soon. And again, when people decide to quit their part-time or full-time job, that's different for everyone, right? Like I said, my expenses were very low, so I could afford to, but this trade was like the beginning of that for me. I started making gains so big, let alone one that was $6,000 of like, yeah, I don't need to work part-time anymore. And so that was very, very cool. And I like to mention that because that really ties into the entire backstory and the back context of what I've been sharing with you in the beginning of this video. And this was one of them, right? This is how I juggled through college and classes, and then ultimately what led to me quitting my part-time job. So that was that. And again, at this time, around April 2019, I was approaching 100K in profits as well. But I was able to pull some money out, actually live off that money and not have to work to live off. Trading became my actual job. So there's that one. Now this one is an OTC panic dip buy example. We haven't gone over that example yet, but there's been dozens. But again, I wanted to pick one that was actually really, really, really really good. And again, this was in February of 2019. For those who remember SHMP, probably the best OTC runners we've ever seen in terms of just the volatility, the volume, the run up. I mean, it was so good. I mean, again, this was a ticker that was, I think worth like a penny, maybe even less. And at one point it ends up getting as high as like 97, 98 cents, right? The high of day of this entire run was like right here, which looks, I mean, remember it's like 96, 97 cents, and a huge panic. And I actually shorted this, right? So I actually made some money on the short, but like I said, how the short side and then the panic dip buy played hand in hand with each other. I was short, covered, made some money, and then I actually panic dip bought it right at the bottom where you see all this volume coming in. If you know how to watch level 2 on OTCs, like that's where the turn kind of came. We call it the OTC level 2 turn, where the dip buy actually begins. I bought it and call it 53, 54 average. I then sold it at like 62, 63. I ended up making $2,000, which again, for a panic dip buy was actually a lot for me. Again, OTC panic dip buys were one of those very first setups for me, and very much similar to the CAN example and the BTCS example. Most dip buys were only 50, 100, 150, $200 profits, like at most. And so making a $2,000 profit here was huge. And again, it was a great dip buy. And not only that, ended up bouncing much higher all the way up to 75. Had I held my shares, it probably could have been another 5, 6, 7, 8K winner. It could have been very big. Again, I don't remember the exact specifics of it, but I just know I made $2,000 taking it pretty much 10 cents. So there's that one. And then last but not least, we have one more pump and dump example, RIVX. As you can see here, very manipulated, very up. This is actually finally a daily chart example of you guys. Sorry, I take so much intraday picks, but not daily picks. This pump and dump lasted for well over 2 months, right? All of November and then all of December. And this was in late 2019. I remember actually getting short here and actually having to take some losses because I had got bought in. Like again, for those who know how to swing short certain stocks, your broker might buy you in. They might say, hey, you can't have your shares to short anymore. We need to buy you in. I remember losing about $1,000 or so getting bought in. But even though I was getting bought in, I still wanted to stay short. I still kept reshorting when I found shares to borrow to short. Finally, it ends up dumping all the way down from 10 to 4 in a single day. I held through this bounce and it actually ends up getting halted by the SEC. This was one of the first kind of couple halts that I actually been stuck in. But again, when they usually halt an OTC, it only usually lasts for about 2 weeks. I obviously stayed short for those 2 weeks. I reopened down at $2 and then sold off down to 27 cents. And I covered and ended up making, what was it, 11 grand? My first 10K profit, this was. And again, this was in pretty much now January of 2020. And now I mentioned this ticker because one, it was very significant. My first 5-figure trade, 11K. And again, this was what really started the momentum for me for 2020, where a lot of my months now going into when I graduated college, I started having 5-figure months. It wasn't no longer having only 5-figure profits. We're only making a few grand a month. It was now I'm making 10, 15, 20 grand a month. Again, it adds up very quickly. Like I said, we went from making only a couple $100 in 2017 per trade to now making a couple $1,000 at the minimum per trade in 2020. And again, that's what led to me making $200,000 by the time I graduated college. And then for those who know how the rest of 2020 went, it was the COVID market. Everyone went into quarantine. Stock market went absolutely berserk. I ended up making $700,000 in the rest of 2020. I then made over $2 million in 2021. And yeah. And now we're in 2023. At 2022, I made about 500,000 or so. 2023 year to date, as I'm recording this, I'm up 700,000. So like you said, I know these roots and my background of how I got here because it's such a monumental thing that it doesn't sound like much of the smaller money, but all of those setups that I've just showed you at some level, maybe a little bit different, but I still trade them. The edge at some level is still there. I still trade them when they show up and they still make me money for the most part. I know it's been a long video, but thank you so much guys for watching. Hopefully you learned a lot about my journey, kind of dealing with college and the earlier years of my trading and how it's kind of morphed me into who I am today. Anyways, thanks so much for watching guys. Make sure to like and subscribe and I'll see you next time. Peace.